I don't mean to alarm you, but we are currently halfway through 2025. A fact I recently had to remind myself of after trying to buy a budget gaming laptop for a video. All the laptops had basically identical specs to 4 years ago. And then I decided to test some of these older budget gaming laptops that I had lying around on modern games. And it made me realize somehow Nvidia has an even more dire budget gaming laptop GPU situation than its normal graphics cards, which is wild. So in today's video, we're going to talk a bit more about that. Even though we're living in the French cinema nouveau version of the Jetsons' future, if you have around $800 and you walk into, I don't know, a Best Buy to buy a gaming laptop, a lot of your options likely has an RTX 2050 in it. Now, it's not quite as old as it sounds. The laptop RTX 2050 was actually launched back in 2021, but that still makes it a 4-year-old laptop GPU. Now, if you want a slightly newer number, luckily there are also some RTX 3050s floating around in the same price point. But interestingly, the 3050 is actually older than the 2050 for some bizarre reason. So you're only getting a slightly beefier GPU. We'll talk about the specs in a bit because that gets wildly complicated and frustrating. But what's so weird to me about these laptops is that it's not like they've been selling the same gaming laptop for the last 4 years. A lot of these 3050 based ones have a new CPU architecture in them. So the only reason that the laptop companies keep using these older GPUs is because they don't have a better alternative from Nvidia to use, despite it having been 4 years. Now, a lot of you are probably going, but David, what about the RTX 4050? That's a much newer GPU. The problem is that the 4050 didn't really replace the 3050 and the 2050. It seems to have just kind of slipped in just above it in terms of price point. So if you're buying a very budget gaming laptop in 2025, most of your options have a 4-year-old entry-level GPU in them. And entry-level really is the key word here because these GPUs are terrible. Now, you know how these days people are all up in arms about how 50 series graphics cards are getting 8 gigs of video memory. Well, you can tell that those people are clearly not laptop gamers, because laptop gamers dream of 8 gigs of video memory. They're sitting over in their cock corner salivating at the idea of ever reaching the heights of 8 gigs of video memory.
Oh yeah, you use that 8 gigs good.
Both the RTX 2050 and 3050 are stuck with 4 gigs of video memory. And that's a GPU, again, that you can buy new in 2025. Now, in all fairness, there is a 6 gig version of the RTX 3050 which they launched about a year and a half later, but all that does is throw chimpanzee poo in the water and murky it all up, because it's a completely different graphics card. Not only does it have the more video memory, which is somehow slower than the 4 gigs, but there's also way more meat on the GPU's bone. In fact, it has way more in common with the 4050 than it does with the 3050. And the problem is, the 4 gig version of the 3050 is still available, and it's really difficult to tell which one your laptop comes with. Take this listing from Best Buy, for example. Nowhere in the listing does it say whether it's the 4 or the 6 gig version of the 3050 you're getting. You're just gambling when you buy it. And you'll see later in the benchmarks that the difference between the 4 gig and the 6 gig is massive. I didn't actually specifically test one, but again, it's basically a 4050, and the performance difference between those two GPUs is huge. So not only do you probably have to buy a 4-year-old terrible GPU, but they also threw a bunch of landmines in there so that you can accidentally permanently maim yourself. And the thing is, I didn't even know about the 6 gig version of the 3050 until I just now did a bunch of research on it. How is the average consumer going to be able to navigate the situation? Again, especially when the laptop manufacturers don't even tell you which version you're getting. But anyway, with that brief summary of the mad incoherence of the budget laptop space at the moment, let's test these laptops to see how these 4-year-old GPUs perform. Now, when looking at these performance results, there is some stuff we need to keep in mind. These laptops have different CPUs, so that can affect the results here. So this isn't necessarily a straight apples to apples comparison when looking at the different GPUs. And each laptop GPU has different potential power limit configurations. So for example, not all 4 gig 3050s are made equal, which is another fun little way a laptop GPU can screw you over. For 2 of the laptops, the Asus and the HP, I did install a fresh copy of Windows 11 on them just to minimize any syphilis-related performance loss. However, with the little Alienware X14 over here, it threw multiple tantrums when I tried to reinstall Windows on it, and when I did eventually get a fresh copy of Windows installed on it, it was running very slowly and sporadically. So when looking at the Alienware X14, which is our RTX 4050 testbed, it is using its standard Dell Windows install.
Ew.
So with that, let's start off with the 2050's results. And when it comes to CS2, which is our esports title benchmark running at 1080p low settings, it gives a very playable result. And it's actually similar with the RTX 3050 based laptop, which just gave us a slightly higher result. But for esports titles, both of these laptops are usable. However, that doesn't really mean much. You can play CS2 at 1080p low settings on your grandmother's catheter, so it's a little bit of a consolation prize. But if that's all you want to do on them, you can kind of get away with it. However, the moment you step up to Cyberpunk, the RTX 2050 really starts to struggle. At 1080p medium settings, we're barely getting over 30 frames per second. Now again, with these results, you do kind of need to ignore the thermals. It's a laptop, it's going to be running super hot. I ran all 3 of them in performance mode, so they sent the most power possible to the GPUs. But yeah, Cyberpunk not doing great. However, it's an RTX GPU, so you do have DLSS available. And if you use DLSS balanced, the game runs quite a bit better, and it's getting to the point where it feels reasonable to use. And the same goes with the RTX 3050 based laptop. We were getting a little bit more performance. I mean, quite frankly, these 2 GPUs perform functionally identically, but you do get a little bit more performance out of the 3050. But now things start getting serious, moving to a UE5 game, Stalker 2. Now, something to bear in mind with the Stalker 2 results is that the game is quite CPU intensive, and some of these laptop CPUs aren't that great for gaming, so that does play a role. But here, with DLSS at quality, which with Stalker 2 is already very aggressive, we're rendering at quite a low resolution here, we're getting in the mid-30s, and the game is quite stuttery and it doesn't feel great. And remember, this is at the lowest settings at 1080p with upscaling. And when you step up to the RTX 3050, you just get about 2 frames per second. So again, they're functionally identical. So in other words, when it comes to modern games, they're both functionally garbage. But it gets a lot worse. Here, I'm running Doom: The Dark Ages on the RTX 2050 based laptop. And it's running so poorly that I had to double check that I was actually using DLSS quality at 1080p low settings, and this is what we're getting. It's about 20 frames per second, and it feels like we're playing the game in slow-mo. What is this, gaming for sloths? I don't know enough about sloth biology to understand how they perceive motion, but I hope they perceive it very, very slowly, because that's the only way they're not gonna hate gaming on this GPU. Oh, and did I say this was the RTX 2050 running Doom: The Dark Ages? I actually meant that's the 3050. That's the better result. This is what it looks like running on the 2050. How is it even worse? Again, this is at 1080p with DLSS at low settings, and we're barely getting 14 frames per second. It is wild feeling. So again, if you have a desktop GPU and you're really upset about how your 8 gigs of video memory is holding you back, at least you don't have a 2050. So with that, we've had a look at the first 2, the 2050 and the 3050, and we can very comfortably just take these 2 GPUs and put them in a dumpster over here because they are garbage. And if you have one of these GPUs, I'm sorry. I feel bad for you. But with that, Let's have a look at the RTX 4050, which gives us a whopping 6 gigs of video memory. Ooh, fancy. When it comes to the 4050, I was very surprised at how much more powerful it was than the first two GPUs. It makes sense, not only do you get 2 gigs more video memory, but you also get quite a lot more like GPU cores and stuff. So it is actually a decent upgrade over those two, which in CS2 gets you over 200 frames per second. So you see a decent jump in performance here. Although, again, the performance is functionally similar. All three of these laptops can run esports titles. But when moving over to Cyberpunk running at 1080p medium settings, it was actually performing better without DLSS on than either of these two laptops were running with DLSS on balanced. So a reasonably demanding game like Cyberpunk is very playable on the 4050. And by extension, it probably would also be quite playable on the 6 gig version of the RTX 3050, which again, as far as I can tell, is very similar to this 4050. And we're even getting playable results in Unreal Engine 5 based games. Stalker 2 gets about 60 frames per second at 1080p low settings. Again, this is with DLSS, but it's usable. It's actually usable, which it wasn't on these two laptops. And then comes the biggest shocker. When we moved to Doom: The Dark Ages, it ran so much better. At 1080p low settings, we were getting 100 frames per second. That is almost 10 times the performance of the 2050 based laptop. That just shows you what an extra 2 gigs of video memory will do. That is crazy. And in fact, the game actually stays playable when you jump the settings up to 1080p high. Again, this is with DLSS, but this is so much better than the other two laptops. So with that, clearly, the RTX 4050 is a massive step up over the 2050 and 3050 4 gig that you're still seeing in a lot of budget gaming laptops. But of course it looks impressive when compared to two graphics cards that were raised huffing lead-based paint. But with these games, we're still running at a mixture of like low settings. I mean, with Stalker 2, that's low with quality DLSS on, and the game is just about playable. So yes, it completely humiliates its stablemates, but it's still not a powerful GPU, and you're finding it in pretty expensive laptops. I mean, this Alienware X14 is a pricey little beast. And at this point, honestly, I wouldn't hold out my breath that the 5050 is going to be a significant step up over the 4050. I mean, we'd be lucky if that gets 8 gigs of video memory. Nvidia's just too busy drowning in money and Michelin star cunnilingus to care about making a good product at this point. In fact, it's in their financial interest to make a product that consumers don't want to buy at this point, so that they can reallocate all that wafer space to AI chips they can sell for 10 times the price. So with that, all I have to say is Nvidia's been dragging their balls in our face for way too long. And don't get me wrong, I love balls in my face as much as the next person, but for 4 years, it's getting real stanky and gross. Please, Nvidia, stop. And on that enlightening note, thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of these budget laptop GPUs. Subscribe on the way down there, and until the next video, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.